ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Big tech and the Australian government are going through kind of a long, public, awkward breakup.
These companies have snubbed their noses at governments in Canada, Britain, Australia for many, many years.
Social media is doing harm to our kids, and I'm calling time on it.
So what does this mean for democracy? And can we fight back against the tech broligarchs? From If You're Listening, this is Australia versus the Internet. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
It's one of the most highly anticipated trials in recent memory, and no wonder. Erin Patterson is accused of murdering 3 people and attempting to murder another after serving up a Beef Wellington allegedly laced with lethal death-cap mushrooms. Today, Stephen Stockwell, co-host of the ABC podcast Mushroom Case Daily, on what to expect as proceedings get underway. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Stephen, you're going to immerse yourself in this trial for the ABC, and we're going to speak to you and your team along the way, of course. Let's just start with what we've seen now the proceedings have actually begun. Just tell me what's happened so far.
So we are in a town called Morwell, which is about 2.5 hours southeast of Melbourne. It's a beautiful town. It is so picturesque. The drive here from Melbourne, you go over these rolling green hills and open up into these wonderful valleys. And this town is playing host to the trial of Erin Patterson. So we are working through the final pre-trial stages. And this week we're expecting opening statements and that trial to begin.
Right. So, and some of the pre-trial elements, they're quite secret, aren't they?
Yes. So the reporting restrictions in Victoria are quite tight. So we can't really talk about, we can talk that pre-trial hearings are happening, but we can't talk about, who's talking at them, what's being discussed, any of those details. So we need to be really careful around kind of what we can reveal and what we can talk to around that. But that process is almost done. And when the trial starts, we can start talking about all of the things that the jury is hearing and what's being presented to them as this trial progresses.
That's going to be fascinating. All right, so let's come back to what we might see play out in the courtroom in a moment. But before we do, let's step back to 2023. When this extraordinary story began to unfold in a really small and pretty peaceful town, right?
Yeah. So this has all happened in this area in Gippsland. And so the lunch was in a place called Leongatha. It's about an hour's drive from Morwell. Really small community. This whole place around Gippsland is, very sort of like lots of series of small towns. So the lunch was in a place called Leongatha. That's, 130 kilometres southeast of Melbourne. It's an old coal mining region. It's really, again, we're talking thousands of people. It's a very tight-knit community. And the people, that's where the lunch was. The people who were attending that lunch were coming from a town nearby, a place called Corumburra, about 15 minutes down the road. Again, another very small community, very tight-knit. So when you have something like this happening, it's something that really deeply affects the community.
Yeah, and Erin Patterson, she lived there.
She did, yeah. So Erin Patterson lived in Leongatha, and the people who attended the lunch that she held, they were from Corumburra.
Okay, all right. And it was outside her home that Erin Patterson would later be approached by the press.
I'm so devastated by what's happened, by the loss of Don. Don is still in hospital. The loss of Ian and Heather and Gail. They were some of the best people that I've ever met.
But let's leave that there for the moment and come back to it in more detail soon. So, Stephen, in July 2023, Erin Patterson hosts the lunch that you've been referring to.
Yes. So she hosts a lunch, and invited to this lunch Gail and Don Patterson, the parents of her estranged husband, and Heather and Ian Wilkinson. Heather Wilkinson is Gail Patterson's sister, so that's how they all fit together here. They come around and they have a meal together. The meal is a Beef Wellington. So a Beef Wellington is, it's a piece of beef that's wrapped in prosciutto and mushrooms. and then again wrapped in pastry. So this is the meal they all sit down and eat together. And then the following day, the 30th of July on the Sunday, all 4 of those guests present to hospital feeling sick. A couple of days later, on the 4th of August, the sisters, Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson, unfortunately pass away. The following day, John Patterson dies. And then this whole story starts to kind of explode in the media. We start hearing stories about it. We start finding out what's going on.
3 people are dead and 1 man is fighting for his life this morning after a suspected mushroom poisoning in South Gippsland in Victoria.
The group was taken to hospital a week ago when they all became ill after eating a meal at a private home in Leongatha.
We start hearing the name Erin Patterson for the first time in the media.
Yeah.
Ms Patterson has been interviewed by police and her home searched, but was released pending further inquiries.
You know, the community was just incredibly shocked. Ian Wilkinson is still alive, so he attended that lunch, but he is in hospital for months. He's a pastor of a local church in Corumburra. It was not until the 23rd of September that he ends up being released and, is able to walk away from this.
Yeah, so 3 people are dead, and as you say, it's really capturing the attention of everyone. I mean, the world is watching this story at this point.
It's the story that has gripped Australia and got a small town reeling.
Police have been searching Erin Patterson's home in the small town of Leongatha.
New questions swirling about the deadly mushroom mystery. Was it accidental, a fatal foray into foraging that killed 3 members of the same family, or was it murder?
And Simon Patterson, that's Erin's former husband, he'd lost both his parents.
He has, yeah. He's lost both his parents. He's lost his auntie as well in that process. It's just incredibly challenging for someone like that. And he gave just such an emotional eulogy at the memorial for them.
As Mum and Dad lay in comas in the Austin Hospital in their final days, it was comforting to know that when we said, "See you later," we knew it was true. And in the meantime, we'll miss them.
And then it's been alleged that 4 people have been poisoned by mushrooms that were in the meal Erin Patterson had prepared, that Beef Wellington.
Yeah, so these are incredibly toxic. On Mushroom Case Daily, we've spoken to a man from Canberra who survived a death cap mushroom poisoning. And he just told the most harrowing story of initially feeling a little bit sick, a little bit ill, and then just, you end up heading towards liver failure. He's incredibly lucky, given the amount that he ate, to have survived something like that.
I was conscious the whole time. So I only started to pass out about 10 days later. Essentially what happens is you end up succumbing to internal hemorrhage. That's how you sort of die from mushroom poisoning, is you bleed out on the inside.
For Ian Wilkinson to survive it is quite incredible after hearing the stories that we've heard. And so the whole thing just causes the body to shut down.
So let's then, Stephen, go back outside Erin Patterson's home, because in August, as we said, the media had gathered there to throw questions at her, and she did decide at one point to stop and speak. So what did she have to say broadly?
Erin appeared really upset when she spoke outside of her house.
Devastated by what's happened, by the loss of Don. Don is still in hospital, the loss of Ian and Heather.
She talked about, how much she loved the people. She broke down when talking about that.
Gail was like...
Take your time.
Gail was the mum that I didn't have because my mum passed away 4 years ago. And Gail's never been anything but good and kind to me.
Was really, really upset, was really quite shaken about it, and just said she couldn't believe what had happened.
What I can tell you is that I just can't fathom what has happened. I just can't fathom what has happened.
And you must be pretty shaken up by this as well.
I'm devastated. I love them. And I can't believe that this has happened, and I'm so sorry that they have lost their lives.
Police say you're a suspect. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, I say I didn't do anything. I love them. And I'm devastated.
All right. And at this point, police are still investigating. And the thing is, it takes really quite some time, doesn't it, for charges to be laid?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about the timeline of this, the lunch was on the 29th of July in 2023. There's a huge amount of conversation that we start hearing towards the end of July through the start of August. It's not until the 2nd of November that Erin Patterson is charged with murder and attempted murder. These are charges that she has pled not guilty to.
Okay, well, Stephen, let's go back to the court proceedings then, which have now begun. This is a case that will be heard by a jury. That's usual practice, is it, for a murder trial?
It is, yes. So there'll be 12 people who will be sitting on a jury for this, and they'll be the ones who make the decision on whether Erin Patterson is innocent or guilty. They'll sit through the 4 to 6 weeks of hearings that we'll have through this trial. They'll hear all of the evidence that's presented. They'll go through that, they'll listen, and then once they've been through that process, they'll retire and make their decision.
Do we know if Erin Patterson will take the stand?
At this stage, we don't.
Right.
The trial will be starting this week. We're looking for it to run about 4 to 6 weeks or so. But yeah, not sure if she'll be taking the stand.
Okay, so tell me then, what will the prosecution actually have to prove to secure a guilty verdict?
So the prosecution team will need to prove to the jury that Erin Patterson murdered Gail and Don Patterson and Heather Wilkinson and attempted to murder Ian Wilkinson beyond reasonable doubt. So they need to show them that they can't have any doubt, that they all need to agree on their verdict. And the prosecution is trying to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Erin Patterson is guilty of those charges. Of course, you've got the defence, who is working on the other side of that. They are trying to present that doubt. They're going to sit there. They're going to be trying to challenge and question. That work is, a lot of that is done towards the end of a trial around the closing arguments. But again, we've spoken to defence solicitors in the course of producing Mushroom Case Daily. And a big part of what, they said their work is building that rapport and engagement with the jury to try and, help them see their version of events.
Where there's a jury, you want those people to buy into you and like you. And it starts from the beginning. And because if they like us, they're more likely to like our client. Whereas if they hate us, the same is to rub off on our client. So you're trying to get them on board.
And as we mentioned, Stephen, there is just so much interest in this case. It really will be receiving so much attention, won't it?
Oh, it'll be huge. I mean, we popped into the pub for a meal last night and without even attempting to, we bumped into a documentary crew who's also working and covering this trial. So there's a huge amount of interest. Even just being outside of court briefly earlier today, I saw half a dozen journalists who are here for the final pre-trial stuff, which is, still quite minor in the sense of this trial. So there's a huge amount of interest in this case, a huge amount of international interest as well. We see this story all over media, all over the world with this. And, recently on Mushroom Case Daily, we spoke to a former prosecutor, barrister Nick Pappas, KC, and he mentioned, he sort of likened it to the interest that we saw around the George Pell case when he was charged.
The fact that there's a glare of publicity, I think, doesn't make much difference, I think, to most of us. It certainly makes no difference to me. In that if I walk out and there's cameras outside or if there's journalists inside court, well, that's my workplace. I mean, that's just pretty much every day.
Part and parcel.
Correct.
All right, and how are the locals actually feeling about all this attention in their town?
What's really interesting, actually, most of them don't know. So because of the way this trial has reached this point, through all the pre-trial hearings, we can't report on that, we can't talk about a lot of that. And so there hasn't been a huge amount of media leading up to this case. And so being in town, talking to people, even outside court, people are like, oh, what's going on here? And we're telling people why we're here in town. So, it's a small town. I mean, I don't think it'll take long for word to get around. I expect the next day or so, people will talk. And by the time we get to opening statements on Wednesday or Thursday, the town will be fully aware what's going on, if not from the news on the grapevine, by the small army of media that would have descended upon them.
All right. So, Stephen, if Erin Patterson is found guilty, what kind of penalty could she face? What sort of jail time?
Yeah, so the maximum penalty for murder in Victoria is life imprisonment. So at the moment, Erin Patterson, if she's found guilty of the crimes that have been alleged, will be facing life in prison.
All right, but a way to go yet, and you'll be watching all of it. So thank you so much for your time, Stephen.
My pleasure.
Stephen Stockwell is the co-host of the Mushroom Case Daily podcast, which you can find on the ABC Listen app for day-to-day coverage of the trial. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Adair Shepherd. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.